On the morning of June 3rd, black smoke rose over the city where Vladimir Putin was born. Ukraine bombed Saint Petersburg. Not a border checkpoint near the front line, not a radar outpost somewhere in the countryside. The city where the Russian president grew up, lit on fire while Putin was hosting the world's most powerful investors inside it. If you filled your gas tank this week, if you hold a single share in any market anywhere on Earth, or if you checked the news on your phone this morning, what happened in St. Petersburg in the last 48 hours has already reached your life. You just did not know which fire set the price. Here is the question every military analyst in Washington and Moscow is asking, and cannot fully answer. How does the world's largest nuclear state allow its founder's hometown to be struck on live international television in broad daylight while the president is hosting a global economic forum inside the same city? By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what Ukraine destroyed and why those specific targets were chosen, why NATO's Secretary General landed in Kyiv at the exact hour the bombs were falling, and what Russia's threatened next move tells you about how close this war has come to crossing boundaries the world has been holding open for 4 years. Let us start with the exact sequence of events, because the timeline is the entire story. St. Petersburg is not a city the world normally associates with drone strikes. It is Russia's second largest city, home to the Hermitage Museum, the winter palaces of the Tsars, and the Naval river delta that opens into the Baltic Sea. It is also the city where Vladimir Putin was born in 1952, where he grew up, and where every Russian ruler since Peter the Great has understood the symbolic weight of keeping it inviolate. On this particular morning, the city carried one additional layer of significance. Putin's flagship annual economic gathering, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, known globally as the SPIEF, was opening its doors to business delegations from more than 130 countries. Wall Street analysts, energy executives from Asia, government ministers from the Gulf, all had convened for what the Kremlin positions as Russia's annual answer to Davos. Putin himself was scheduled to deliver the keynote address. Then, before dawn, Ukraine launched more than 350 drones toward St. Petersburg and surrounding strategic targets. Russian air defense intercepted approximately 50 over the Leningrad region alone. The drones that reached their targets did not miss. The St. Petersburg oil terminal, a critical fuel transshipment hub located on the Baltic coast 17 kilometers from the forum's convention center, was struck and set ablaze. Columns of black smoke visible for miles across the city skyline began rising while forum delegates were still checking into their hotels. Photographs from the Baltic coast showed fire advancing through storage infrastructure in a way that is measured in weeks to repair, not hours. At the Kronstadt naval base, the facility guarding St. Petersburg's sea approaches since the 18th century, Ukrainian drones struck a Russian corvette sitting in dry dock for scheduled maintenance. Satellite imagery released within hours confirmed fire damage along the vessel's hull. This was not merely damage to one ship. This was a message to every Russian naval commander on every fleet. No port inside Russia's territorial waters is beyond reach. At Pulkovo Airport, flight operations were halted. Nearly 30 inbound flights were delayed by more than 2 hours. 9 aircraft were diverted entirely to other airfields. International delegates arriving for the SPIEF landed elsewhere and were bussed into a city where the morning air carried the smell of burning petroleum from the direction of the port. Volodymyr Zelensky spoke before the European markets opened. He called the strikes fair. Russia, he stated, had killed 23 Ukrainian civilians in attacks the previous evening. He then said the part that carries the most weight: Ukraine intended to escalate. The scale of long-range strikes would increase. It was, he stated, only a matter of time. But here is what no news outlet is clearly connecting. The timing of this strike against St. Petersburg was not chosen at random. And understanding why Ukraine chose this morning over any other morning tells you more about Kyiv's actual strategy than any frontline map published this week. The SPIEF Forum is not merely a conference. For the Kremlin, it functions as annual proof of survival, the public demonstration that Russia remains connected to global capital, that serious investors still regard the Russian state as a viable partner, despite 4 years of war and sanctions. More than 130 countries sent representatives. A senior official from the Trump administration was scheduled to appear on the program. Ukraine chose this morning deliberately. The message was not addressed to the oil terminal. It was not addressed to the Corvette at Kronstadt. The message was addressed to every executive, minister, and banker sitting in the Expo Forum Convention Center 17 kilometers away, watching black smoke rise over their host city from conference room windows. Russia wants the world to believe this war is a manageable problem that does not interrupt the conduct of global business. Ukraine wants the world to understand that the war follows Putin wherever he does business, including the city of his birth, on the one morning each year when he is trying hardest to look like a viable global partner. That is a message written in smoke and fire, addressed to exactly the audience Ukraine intended. At the same moment, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte made an unannounced landing in Kyiv. Standing beside Zelensky, Rutte stated publicly that Russia was growing desperate, that Ukraine had made sustained battlefield gains, and that Russia had suffered net territorial losses for the first time since 2023. The visit was coordinated with the strikes. The combined signal to Moscow was deliberate. Ukraine does not act alone, and the alliance behind Ukraine sees everything. Russia's response came from Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov within hours. Russia's reaction to St. Petersburg, he told state media, would be systemic in nature, not proportional, not measured, systemic. That is the word governments use when they are telling you that what follows will not be a single retaliation, but an ongoing, escalating campaign designed to accumulate damage over time. And now, pause on that word, systemic, and consider what it means when the government using it has already positioned a weapon inside Belarus that no NATO air defense system currently deployed anywhere in Europe can intercept. On January 9th of this year, Russia used the Oreshnik intermediate-range ballistic missile for the second time in combat. The target was infrastructure in the Lviv region of western Ukraine, approximately 70 kilometers from the Polish border. 70 kilometers from NATO territory. The Oreshnik travels at speeds exceeding 10 times the speed of sound. Ukrainian air defense tracked it and could not engage it. The gap in Europe's defensive architecture was made visible to every defense ministry in the alliance. The Oreshnik is not a battlefield weapon. It is a nuclear-capable missile now confirmed to be positioned inside Belarus. From there, it can reach Warsaw in under 5 minutes, Berlin in under 10, Paris in under 20. Germany activated its first Arrow 3 air defense battery this year. One battery against a weapon that maneuvers at 13,000 kilometers per hour and releases a cluster of independently maneuvering warheads on final approach. When Peskov said the response would be systemic, every European defense ministry understood which system he meant. Every general staff in NATO is running the same calculation this week. And none of the answers that calculation produces are comfortable ones. Here is that calculation in plain language. Ukraine struck Russia's second city. Russia threatened systemic retaliation. Russia's most advanced offensive weapon is deployed in Belarus at operational readiness. NATO's Secretary General endorsed the escalation from Kyiv on the same morning the bombs fell. And an American government official sat 17 kilometers from a burning fuel terminal and continued attending the forum that was the political target of the entire attack. But there is one dimension of Kronstadt that no coverage has adequately examined. The drone that found the Russian corvette in dry dock did something that extends far beyond the damage to one vessel. Russia's naval doctrine has always rested on one foundational assumption: strategic depth protects the home fleet. Kronstadt is not a forward position near contested waters. It is the historic guardian of Saint Petersburg's sea approaches, the facility that has anchored Russian naval operations in the Baltic since the reign of Peter the Great. Ships go to Kronstadt to be safe. Ukraine just delivered a precision strike to a warship sitting inside it. That changes every assumption Russian admirals make about where to base, refit, and maintain their vessels. If Kronstadt is reachable, any Russian naval facility within extended drone range is now a legitimate target. The Black Sea Fleet has already been effectively destroyed. Ukraine eliminated more than a third of it through maritime drones and precision strikes over 2 years. The Baltic Fleet has now been formally served notice that territorial waters no longer provide protection. Germany, Poland, Finland, and the 3 Baltic states all border the same water where this strike was executed. The distance from Kronstadt to the nearest NATO coastline is shorter than the distance from Washington to Baltimore. The smoke over that dry dock on the morning of June 3rd was visible from Finnish territory on a clear day. And Ukraine's president said on camera that the escalation has only just begun. So here is the question that determines everything that follows. Ukraine has struck Russia's second city, its most symbolically significant Baltic fuel terminal, and a warship inside the oldest protected naval base on Russia's Baltic coast. Russia has threatened a systemic response with its only weapon that European air defense cannot stop. NATO's Secretary General stood in Kyiv and endorsed the escalation at the same hour the bombs fell. The war that has been held at managed temperature for 4 years now has its own momentum, and no government on any side has publicly described where it leads. Is this the moment the conflict crosses from a regional war into something the entire security architecture built since 1991 was specifically constructed to prevent? Or is this the same pattern of controlled escalation both sides have managed before? Loud enough to signal resolve, calibrated to stop short of the line. One side says Ukraine is winning, and this strike is the clearest proof yet. Russia cannot respond in kind without crossing thresholds that end the regime. The other side says Peskov used the word systemic deliberately. The Oreshnik in Belarus is not theater, and a regime with no good options is the most dangerous kind. Write your position in the comments, because the people who say this is Ukraine's most decisive hour, and the people who say this is the week the war stopped being containable, are about to have the most important argument on this channel.